Now, economics is its own entire field, which has a language and a terminology of its own, and it cannot be understood or intuited by concepts like common sense or from watching movies and TV shows or just reading general newspapers by journalists that aren't economic experts. I myself knew very little about this topic as I go back each few years. Each time I have to do a deep dive. I have to go to people who are literal financial experts. I cross-reference all the information. I get into touch with my source network. I try and get as much financials as I can. And then I'll put together a timeline and a story. And guess what? It's far, far from simple. And so when people think stuff like, if you are making money, you are doing it right. And if you're losing money, you are doing it wrong. That's not how investment works. That's not how like startups work. It depends what sort of industry you're in. Also, people consistently who are outsiders get the concept of revenue and profit completely wrong. They think they're interchangeable. Revenue is just the money your company brings in. Profit is how much you actually get to keep after all the other things you have to pay. There's even a concept, a crucial one called EBIT, which is earnings before tax and interest. So it's all about what are the expenses, what's the tax, what interest is there, etc. What things do you have to account for? Sometimes in certain jobs you have to pay people's healthcare. Now, on this topic of the LCS walkout, the reason I'm making this video is because I've seen so much nonsense all over the place. Let's not even get into some of the utter moron influencer people who just played League of Legends 7 years ago and like, well, I'll just win now. One of those guys, mate, let's just say he's pretty damp and not particularly skeptical. If he ever went to court, I'll be an expert witness and I'll testify that he can't actually be convicted of any crime. He does not have the cognitive functioning to actually even understand basic concepts. And just, he's so inarticulate and stupid. It is unbelievable. So I've heard stuff like, whether the revenue from the teams is this high or is it half as much? I've heard, here's what the teams are spending on their salaries and the greedy teams are just keeping this money themselves. I've heard this notion that like they're just getting this money that is given to them by Riot and then they're just bloody investing in other games and just raising up their own wealth and the org's getting massive and they're keeping all the money from these players. Well, you know what? I have the best sources. I don't have to go on hearsay or rumour. And so I'll tell you a Christopher Hitchens quote, which has always rung true with me when it comes to journalism. He said, I became a journalist because I did not want to rely on newspapers for information. Now, I'll also just say, I noticed some of the Journalist of the Year award winners at a bunch of different awards and sites. I noticed they're just nowhere to be found on this topic, as per usual. It's just the bozo people with the Pokemon avatars and no identity. You're like, sorry, got it all wrong, guys. It won't happen again. Like, these people not only do they have trash sources, they don't have enough sources and they don't have the technical ability and technique understanding to actually know how to corroborate information. Hence why they're just wrong and they're having to do all these apologies. You don't see me and Richard Lewis having to do apologies and retract what we said because we can stand by what we've said. We know it's legit. We have even independently corroborated it. So when it comes to this topic, the whole thing of the walkout and should there be academy and can they afford academy and how they keep money, you have to know the economics of the league. If you don't know the economics of the league, how could you make these judgments? How could you decide who's moral and who isn't, who's like good in business and who isn't, who's an idiot and who's clever, who's shady and who's legit? You can't. You're just getting led by politicians and fast, smooth talkers who are saying the right things that you're latching onto, even though, by the way, half the things they say are mutually exclusive, I've noticed. But that's not what this video is going to be about. It's going to be about revealing and explaining some of the economics of the LCS. And when you see how bad it is, guys, you're going to understand why the team orgs don't themselves come out and sell this stuff. You're going to understand why this is the dirty secret nobody wants to talk about. Because it actually means, basically, the whole thing right now with the academy thing and with the salaries of the players, it's not even just like rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. It's playing musical chairs for chairs that are on the Titanic that's already hit the iceberg and is starting to sink, as you'll find out. So when it comes to this revenue you're hearing about from the LCS that's given to them, no, that's revenue you get because you bought a franchise slot and it was agreed a certain percentage of the revenue generated by the league, not profit. I've heard LCS just constantly loses money for Riot from the way that they calculate it. You get a percentage of that as a team org, and the players get a percentage too. And as far as I know, I remember reading this on the LEC part, they give the money that's for the players to the org, and then the org also pays it through to them. It's called like the league revenue pool or whatever. Now, when you do this, teams, this is one thing you've already heard of, I've heard the most revenue the teams have ever gotten is from this year, and it's 2.25 million is the number I was told. That seems legit. I corroborated with a few different people. It was never, ever in history $3 million. That number, $3 million, which Philip Aram, the PA leader guy, said on the Four Horsemen that he had multiple sources, and he even said give him upwards of 3 million. Now, I don't even think that's the correct phrasing if you know what that means. But the idea it was 3 million, nonsense based on all the people I've had. Now that is so suspicious to me. Again, I won't make this too much of a tangent. Because he worked for Evil Geniuses a couple of years ago. So I have to say, I think he's full of shit. I think he even put that number out there to sex it up and make it sound like they're getting more than they are. Travis, apparently saying it's between 1.5 million and 3 million. The fucking state of that range. You may as well have just said it's millions. Like, you don't fucking know. It's double the amount, bro. The difference between 1.5 and 3 million is 1.5 million. What the fuck? You don't have any sources. You're just talking out your ass. Or someone told you like the first year's amount from ages ago. Then they told you a more recent one. Maybe you even went, oh, I've heard someone else say 3 million. And you just made this crazy. You may as well have not reported anything at that point in time. So in past years, I've heard it was 2 million and then other amounts, etc. As far as I know, except for teams that have done crazy slashing everyone to the league minimum now, which is $75,000, all the teams in LCS run at a deficit from their League of Legends division. Especially when you factor in teams that have like facilities with upkeep, etc. I've heard even some of the smaller team orgs, their teams in League of Legends lose over $1 million a year. And at best could maybe be just under $1 million losing. That's to be like the worst teams in the league. Here's a little good one for you. You'll have heard that story of how NRG bought CLG's spot. I've heard that it's so bad in the league right now with how much you bleed and how little you get back that actually CLG paid NRG cash to take this spot and got equity in return because they were bleeding out so much into this LCS spot that essentially you say, right, we'll pay you some money to take it off our hands instead of having to pay the whole amount ourselves. Then let's get to where the important thing is, right? Which is this salary, this money going to players and coaches. And we're going to bundle players and coaches together because effectively they're being treated the same way, right? They're employees of the org, contractors, who it's all about them getting the money. That's what all the fans have been rallied around. Oh, the players, the poor players are being exploited, right? Here's a few, and I'll start light and I'll go hard as fuck after that, right? Salaries for players and coaches are greater than 100% of the league revenue generated for Riot. I've heard the lowest year was 120%, and others have said if you include housing and food, over 200% of the league revenue generated for Riot is paid out to players and coaches as their salaries. Their salaries are absurdly inflated based on the revenue of the league and the business ROI of the league. So as a result, people even say, when they start doing that thing of like, oh, you shouldn't be paid this much, or they don't need this much salary, right? That's even just salary, guys. You're not factoring in housing in LA, food, travel, all these facilities. And remember, people previously have even been contractors, right? Well, what about the teams that took them on and pay the healthcare? There's another nice little contribution you're going for. So this notion that the orgs are just greedy, I mean, maybe they greed a little bit for certain players and bid each other up too much. But by the way, people openly suggesting they should just get together, them and Riot, behind closed doors and control the price. Wait, you mean illegal price/salary fixing? That would be an enormous lawsuit. And that could just fuck the entire league and get all the government on your ass. You also hear all this nonsense about them. Well, why are they paying such salaries? Like, you guys are the ones who bid it up. Like, yeah, in a way, but you guys don't understand the way a market works. Like, the market is set by the highest bidder, assuming the player acts totally in his own self-interest and goes for the highest dollar amount. In that kind of a scenario, if one party comes in and can bid really, really high, you know how an auction works. It doesn't matter that at the end, like, they could all drop out. Like, oh, but there's only me left. Like, yeah, but that's because they dropped out because you're pushing it higher and higher, and then you have to pay the top amount. They don't go, right, well, it's not worth that, though. So, of course, you don't really have to pay that. Actually, this guy who offered 300k instead of $1 million, he can have it. So first of all, the buyer sets the market. Then secondly, that we live in a global League of Legends ecosystem. When you're importing players, now you're bidding against European teams. Now you're bidding against Chinese teams, against Korean teams. So they can bid it up as well. And by the way, just as an aside, I've heard some mad shady shit out of China and Korea where they just have bullshit agents, sometimes literally like the cousin of the fucking player under a different name. And then they're just lying about the different parties going back and forth. And essentially, because you don't have the right connections in the scene, TSM. You just don't know and you just get fleeced, and sometimes he's even making a whole bunch of the money back as like a cut straight up or some form of embezzlement almost. So it's not as simple as like, just pay less then. Well, then you're not going to be very competitive, are you? The point is, these are all very complicated, nuanced areas, and people are taking such crazy, like, simple, it's just obviously that, and everyone who doesn't agree is biased and corrupt and a piece of shit. Now let's go into this detail, and you'll see how bad it is for the League of Legends pros in LCS, guys, and the ones in Academy too, only making 75, 60, $100,000 a year to play in Academy, get no viewers, right? Remember what I just said about over 100% of league revenue, up to 200%, depending on team, is being paid out to the athletes that play in esports in the LCS, right? Here's the rev share of the major sports leagues, that some of these even have like unions and a collective bargaining agreement that they revisit every few years and have lockouts. MLB appears to be the highest, and that is 54% to the players, athletes. NBA is 50%. NFL is 50%. What was the other one? Oh, UFC obviously doesn't have the same union thing. That's only 13%. I just said over 100% and up to 200%. 120 is what I was told was the lowest by the most legit sources. Now, here's another thing. In the past, except for this year, apparently you used to get the rev payment towards the end of the year. So you used to have to front all the costs of all the things you're paying, and then you get it later. Now, you don't just have millions sitting in your pocket. I said everyone's losing money, so you're going to get to that. Now, apparently now they cut it in half, and you get like one part halfway through and one part afterwards. I think that was even negotiated by the teams because obviously they're all bleeding out. Now, obviously, a major issue here is, yeah, people didn't buy into franchising thinking it was going to make them a return in the short term. One of the reasons you did it was the league was going to grow, the revenue was going to grow to offset your costs and allow you to field competitive rosters. And then over time, the value of the slots would go up. Remember, up until last year, we heard in LEC, people are trying to sell for 30, 40 million. That's why people are getting out, because actually they get out with a profit from LEC sometimes. Well, remember, slots in NA, originally it was like 10 million if you were like an established team, and I think it was 13 million if you were like an outsider coming in. And since then, a bunch of people have bought in. Now, you might remember going back years, e.g. Philip Aram's old org, they in like summer 2019 or whatever, supposedly bought in for like $30 million and 250,000 or something. Now, if you go and look at the reports on TSM who were trying to sell, they're apparently only asking for 20 million. It was 30 million in 2019. It's only 20 million now, and that's desperation. I've told you about what the CLG one was. If they were still valued at 30 to 40 million or going up, then there'd be a reason to invest. There'd be a way to offset. There'd be a way to convince people with VC to put it in. By the way, worst time ever to get VC in esports. Even one of the worst ad markets right now to actually get money in. So the idea of just getting more money in as an org, not from Riot or this revenue aspect, and then just giving it to other people is absolute lunacy. It's suicide for these orgs, and they will just leave if they are forced to. So let's keep going on the data, shall we? In terms of the LCS franchising, which began in 2018 and goes, well, let's say till the end of this year, the number I was given is $170 million in salaries to players and coaches. 170 million. Add in housing, food, that goes to $200 million or more. Team orgs, likely add in franchise fees, are down well over 200 million. It could be $250 million. That's after the revenue they took in themselves, by the way. $250 million they're down since 2018, these team orgs, all collectively. I said they've paid 170 million in salaries. Their total revenue received, all the teams since the beginning of franchising, is about $80 million rev share. That's before we get into all the other costs. I've been told that their team orgs have collectively paid Riot something between $100 and $130 million in franchise fees. So already we're way past the rev that you've taken back. They've paid the players, like I said, $170 million in salaries and the coaches, food and housing, up to $200 million, costs millions to keep the lights on in your org as well and have these facilities. How can you possibly run like that? Over $200 million collectively down from having LCS teams. And you're making back 2.2 million a year each. So times it by 10, 22 million. It's 200 million down over all these years. Split it by year. You know we're coming close. You're not even coming close to the amounts. Now remember, you forget how much the salaries are, guys. You heard people say that people make millions of dollars. Well, if you know you get 2.2 million back in rev, how can they ever be running a manageable team? But that's to be competitive. That's to have the best rosters. Then you've got to have people who are like sometimes low millions or high 100,000s, and they're the people who are going to get you like a playoff spot. And you can imagine being last place, by the way. You're still spending loads, millions. You're still running at a deficit. It's just that you're not going to be relevant. You're not going to have the big sponsors. No one's going to see you in playoffs. No one's going to care about you. You're not going to be at Worlds. You can't activate with those spots. This is an arms race, guys. There's not some like, be more reasonable. Like that ship sailed years and years ago, or rather that's the one that hit the bloody iceberg, guys. Now, if you go back, the minimum salary is 75,000, but if you go back in history, there've been different times statements have been made. When Chris Greeley, who was at one point the head of NA Esports and the LCS commissioner, he said in 2019 that the average salary in the LCS is north, so over 300,000. Then it was reported by Esports in 2020, the average salary was around 410,000. Right, let's just for a moment just run that average now and imagine that you were just a normal run-of-the-mill team. Let's just imagine every player got the same. They obviously don't. Let's say you had 5 players on the average salary, right? That's 2.05 million without your coaches, housing, food, travel, playing facilities, and we haven't factored in the franchise fees that you have to be in the league in the first place. And you're getting back, it's going to be way less than that, right? In revenue. So the idea you're taking that money and going elsewhere with it, what? Maybe someone like TSM's trying that now when they're slashing all the costs. And that's why they're trying to sell, presumably. Sponsor dollars coming in don't even come close to matching even just the salaries. Orgs are spending millions of dollars on the salaries of their League of Legends team in the LCS, and hundreds of thousands at least for their academy team, and they receive back hundreds of thousands, not millions, in terms of the sponsor revenue. So when you get this whole thing, and I've seen some absolute bozos who out from esports, try to frame this through a Marxist lens of sort of a communist take of like, see, the players are rising up to seize the means of production. That works in the context of like a Victorian factory where the factory owner makes millions or massive amounts of money, and then he pays his workers a pittance, and he just exploits the fact that they have nowhere else to go, and these other factory owners also pay nothing, and it's maybe even a cartel behind the scenes, and they're just making crazy money off them. So if you were to seize the factory and take over, you could get a fair share for yourself. If the players seize these teams somehow, not possible by the franchise fees, by the way, they'd just be losing hundreds of millions of dollars collectively. What money is there to seize? The joke is the main cost is the player salaries, along with the crazy franchise fees. But over time, the salaries will massively outpace that. I said like 170 million paid out in salaries alone over the LCS franchising period. Philip Aram, by the way, just as an aside, knows these things as far as I can tell because of his relationships, and he must have connections to these people to talk to them. So as far as I can tell, he's just dishonest or best disingenuous. I think what he did like a politician was put a lot of different things out there. Some of them didn't even make sense collectively, so that each person who was outraged at Riot or a team could latch onto that thing, and that could be their thing, their stick to beat Riot or the team org with. And it didn't matter. Some of them didn't make any sense. Like on the one hand, it's like, oh, you know, NACL's necessary and vital even if it doesn't get viewership. Well, if the LCS can't support something we need in LCS, like, what the? These takes can't even coexist, mate. And also, he never was even saying keep Academy. He was saying make a cheaper version, potentially open it up, have third-party things, have some promotion into the actual LCS to give people a reason to buy their team in the in the sort of open challenger circuit or whatever, and cut costs, move to Chicago. He was saying all sorts of things that people aren't running with right now. By the way, as I said, the idea of doing salary/price fiction, it's just straight illegal, isn't it? So the idea of what the LCSPA wanted was, they said they wanted 10% of the 3 mil to run NACL. Now, there never was a 3 mil. So let's say 2.2 mil, 10%, so 220,000 a year. But the problem is, California minimums, you're going to pay 5 times 60. So it's going to be 300K is going to be the minimum just to pay salaries. So already, by the way, that's more than 220K. 300K just for the salaries of the players if they're in California. That's why he was suggesting relocate them. But you know, that's not the main issue that's being battled about right now. It's not what people are even saying. There should has to exist no matter what. What about my friends? What about people who lost their jobs? Then that's 300K before housing. You think that's cheap in LA? Coaching. Actually, yeah, this is salaries of the players. Coaching has to be added in there. Food, transport facilities. Now, the reasons why is it got to develop talent. People need jobs. Owners are greedy. There's even one where your boy Devon Nash that you love for everything else, I thought some of his conclusions were pretty whack, but he seems like a legit enough guy. I don't think he's being dishonest. In fact, you know what? Maybe we talk about it on a show sometime. He even himself said NACL is basically like a terrible investment. He can't possibly justify the salaries and the costs in rev. And that even if 17% or whatever was being converted, that's just not enough. The LCS, and this is the worst thing of all time, this is why the iceberg has been hit and you're busy fighting over the chairs as people try to potentially live on the lifeboat if you piss them off. It's shrinking. It's getting 100k viewers. Is that even making Riot that much off in-game stuff anymore if nobody's fucking watching? Especially when you've got other regions that are way better and you'd be way better at allocating resources there instead of paying rev to a dying league that's shrinking. And now players want to demand more and have control and fuck up your sponsor deals and deliverables right before the league starts. Now making sponsors in the worst market ever to get sponsors want to bail and you're bleeding money. People want to sell anyway, even big orgs, and you can't get VC because of the time period that we're in. They couldn't have picked a worse time to do this. And so, you know what? If the LCS revenue grows and the viewership grows and the American economy grows and VC comes back and there's better ad market, then you can discuss investing more. Then you can discuss reducing the cost cutting. Because I've heard more teams want to exit than you know about. I've already hinted and told you some of the things already. So when it comes to this, ask Riot for these things, not the teams. Riot's the one that has a golden goose called League of Legends that makes them bazillions of revenue, right? The team orgs don't. They actually spend millions and get in hundreds of thousands in some of these deals. If you're going to do this, make a true challenger circuit, make it open. By the way, if it can't be sustained by business in itself without the LCS teams doing it, you're admitting that the LCS teams are supplementing it and that basically it can't sustain itself as a business. So why the fuck should the LCS teams pay for it? Now, yeah, they've lied and said we were going to develop the talent. They just meant in a perfect world, obviously. Yeah, I don't like lies. I don't like the idea Riot lied to the PA. If that's true, yeah, fuck them. I hope they do battle back in some sense. I just think you're fucking up the money now. Then also, how about this? Instead of asking, yeah, but if we don't do this, what will happen? What happens if you win? What happens if LCS just gets dropped entirely by Riot? How many jobs will there be then? Less? Will people get paid as much? No, they get paid far less, right?
Hey guys, this is Perks. And you're watching Thorin's YouTube channel. I would like you guys to appreciate his YouTube channel, even though he talks sometimes so much bullshit that not even I can handle it. But most of the time it's pretty funny and entertaining.
Where I come from in England, people will often say, oh yeah, you and whose army? Well, I'll tell you what, I've got my own army backing me up. They're called the Skrilluminati. Thank you to Ahmed Hadjou, Joseph Adcock, Matt Pugnatio Rajcula, Theogony, Animosity, Bot Pounder 420, Jensen Goh, Tobias Bernasconi, Tosh, Tooorin, and as always, you know it, a special thanks goes out to my boy Jerky's Minion. Do you want to suggest a topic or a guest for my content? You want teasers? Find out who's in the upcoming interviews. Do you want to ask me a question in my monthly AMA? Maybe you want to be part of those long discussions where we talk about anything and everything in esports. Well, if so, put your money where your mouth is and enlist today in the Skrilluminati via the Patreon link in the box below.